Good morning. Today I want to talk about a subject that I personally have found I need help with, and I hope it'll be useful for you. We're going to cover two books, Crucial Conversations and Radical Candor. And the reason being is that I don't know about you, but I'm one of those people who just tries to avoid conflict. And both of these books have helped me figure out how to turn conflict into more of a conversation than a conflict. So that's what we're going to cover today. Hope you find it useful. And I know for me personally, both of these books have helped me make a lot of progress in this area. But I've still got a long way to go. Let's spend some time understanding something that I think I misunderstood till I read this book, and I believe that it may help you understand what we mean when we say crucial conversation. Really, what we're talking about are two things: the stakes involved in the confrontation, and also the emotions involved. So, when you look at this chart, you can see that oftentimes what we deal with are just normal conversations, and those are low stakes and they're low emotions, kind of office meetings, different things that we do with our friends. And then you get to where sometimes the emotions are low, but the stakes are high. And that can be disagreements with friends that you definitely disagree with. Sometimes it's team meetings as well, but the emotions involved are not that high. On the other hand, there are times when you can have high emotions and stakes really aren't that high. I've listed some, like those of us that like football. You ever watched a game where you're watching a call and you know it was pass interference against your receiver and you're just shouting at the TV screen as if that makes a difference? So your emotions are high, but are the stakes really that big a deal on one play? No. Now, what are crucial conversations? Those are conversations where the stakes are high and the emotions have the potential to run high. You've had some meetings with subs, with clients, with fellow team members at times, with probably spouses as well, where what you're talking about are so important that it's very difficult to not let your emotions come into the room in a big way. That's what we're going to focus on today. I put this slide in there and I had to laugh as I was doing it because I think I fit every one of these. But this is how we typically, especially if you're like me, a conflict avoider, how we handle those high stakes, high emotion, crucial conversations. One, some of us go to text wars where we try to eliminate the emotions by just doing that. And sometimes you can read a text and you can see the emotions are in there. But what we've also found is the fewer of your five senses that are involved, the more likely it is that text messaging will not calm a situation, it will escalate it. Sometimes we get things where we say something like, well, that was pretty stupid. And what we meant was that wasn't the right answer. And somehow when you said it, it escalated and the shouting begins, So we can twist words sometimes because we'll cover this later. We weren't listening well enough. And then we can return to the silent movie where, okay, I'm not going to get out of control, so I'm not going to say anything. I'm so mad you can just see me just sitting there fuming, but I'm not saying a word. I'm going to play Charlie Chaplin. Then there's the ostrich plan. I had a dog like this that when she didn't want to do what I asked her, she would stare at the wall and pretend like I wasn't there. But it's where if I just ignore it, and how many times I know personally I've had a conflict where I need to resolve it, and instead of having a conversation, I would just shuffle it and I would find 100 reasons not to do something about it. And guess what? It didn't go away. And on the other side, when I actually did deal with it, it wasn't as bad as I thought. And so there has to be a better way, and that's what we're going to start diving into. One thing the book really emphasized that hit home for me was that there's a difference between a confrontation and a conversation. We don't have to always start. It's like the difference between two companies going to war and two companies meeting and negotiating and using a little bit of diplomacy. So I want to emphasize that what we want to try to help you recognize is if I can have a conversation, that may avoid a confrontation. So, where do we want to start? Let's start with first off, before you have that conversation, I recommend you do some writing. And what I want you to do is to write down, what do I really want out of this meeting or this confrontation? Then what do I want to avoid? Because as I said there, every one of us knows certain things that if we don't think about them and write them down, when they all of a sudden happen, that twist and shout, we can get triggered. Now, I don't know about you, but if I asked for a show of hands, if I said, have you ever been triggered in a conversation? You would say yes. This is one way to avoid it. And then let's go a step further. Sometimes we already have scripts in our head about what this person's like, and we're just playing those scripts and trying to prove ourselves right. That may not be the reality. And so, what I found useful is start by looking at the person that you're dealing with and thinking, what do I respect about them? Then I'd go to, what do I hope they respect about me? I think it softens the whole area and it keeps you from getting into a preconceived, oh, I knew that was going to happen mode, and allows you to basically open up to listen more. So, hope that helps. It certainly has for me. Another point that the books present very well is that when you're going to have a conversation that could become a conflict, and it's crucial, your body language is way more important than you realize. How many of us have gone into a meeting and we've seen that the other person is tense or they're relaxed? They can be silent, they can be angry. And you know what? You can tell without them ever saying a word. So, one of the solutions is make sure that when you go into a meeting where you've written stuff down, you have a belief that this can turn into a win-win or we can avoid escalation and this is going to work out, make sure your body language reflects that attitude. I think you'll find it's useful, and it certainly has for me. Okay, a little technique here on, okay, nuts and bolts. How do we actually do that when you're going to have those kind of conversations? You've walked in, you've got your written down plan, you're looking confident, you're smiling. One of the things I've found that's useful, they point out in the book, is let's talk about intentional listening and making sure that we're on the same page before we really dive into the issues. So what you want to do is start by stating the purpose you're there. And then you want to emphasize the amount of respect you have for the other person, regardless of the outcome. So we're going to take it away from a personal issue to one of what's the reality, what are we trying to solve, as opposed to I'm right and you're wrong type of a personal confrontation. Then you might suggest that you've not always things the way the other person has. So they know that you're aware that your viewpoint may not be theirs and that you want to be sure and understand their viewpoint. I think you're going to find when you do that, it's going to start softening the edge that you may feel going into the meeting. And then present your purpose and then ask the other person to clarify their purpose for the conversation. So after you presented yours, just stop and ask them, okay, that's what I thought our purpose was. Let me make sure I understand what is your purpose for us being here, and I want you to make sure that you listen. Now, how do you know if you're listening, and how can you make sure that we're building brick by brick some trust and understanding? Well, restate their comments in a way that says, as I understand it, the purpose that you have is this. Did I get that right? You're going to find that also if you look at Stephen Covey's son, The Speed of Trust, that book talks about one of the keys is the other person, once they feel like that you understand where they're coming from, it just exponentially improves the communication. Because oftentimes, I don't know about you, but I found myself going into a meeting thinking, they really don't understand where I'm coming from, or worse yet, I never stopped and said, what are they thinking? What are their objectives? Because they're oftentimes different than mine. And when I've done that, I've found the meetings are far less confrontational and way more productive. Now, everything I've said so far may be helpful, but sometimes it's not. It may be adequate but not sufficient to have a great outcome. Here's some things during the meeting that I've found have been useful that I want you to also make sure you're aware of. Because even though you're doing all these things, you still may not get to where you want to, but you can always see these warning signs that maybe this is more crucial or more emotional to the other person. You can see the list there, but again, you want to just be aware that these are warning signs that this may be more important to them, or they may not be looking at it from your point of view. So be sure that you watch those, because they can make a difference in how you respond, and not thinking, well, that person's not getting it. There must be something underlying it that you can often say, your silence tells me you're thinking of something that I may not have covered. Is there something that we need to talk about that hadn't been included in the agenda? Things like that. So again, the other thing is that people sometimes they have scripts where they want to point the blame at other people, and you can oftentimes say, it sounds as if you believe this person is at fault and that there's nothing that we need to discuss directly. So sometimes you can bring them out of that, but again, be aware of those, because that's when you may be in a conversation that is heading toward a crucial conversation that you just thought was a low-key conversation. So some of these are really designed for when you're having a conversation to be aware that it's starting to move toward that crucial level of both emotions and stakes that maybe you didn't know was even coming when you started. And again, why are these two books so important? Because it's not a question of if. The conversations, the confrontations, I know they're part of your business. And here's some examples that if I bring them up and ask for, can you think of an example with one of these categories where you have had a conversation that ended up with both high stakes and high emotions? And so sometimes you want to look at that and make sure, because some of them, it may be low stakes to you, but if it's high stakes and high emotions to them, you want to be the solution to make sure you know how to use your skills that these books suggest to move it out of that category. Okay, it's time for me to end this presentation by me getting on my usual soapbox. Those of you that know me and have been around me a little bit know that this is where I love to go, and that is starting with when it comes to crucial conversations like your performance review. I like to encourage you to start with a write-up. What do I mean by a write-up? And that is, for when it comes to working with people, the more you can catch them doing something right, the more you're saying to them that you notice them. And notice them is a form of respect, and it also basically lets people know that you're noticing what they're doing well. And so write-ups can oftentimes turn confrontations into conversations. And how? Well, one of the ways that again, my soapbox, I hope I plant some seeds today, and that is, you don't have to wait for your 90 days or annual review to see how you did. You can do it yourself. I do it every day. I recommend you start, and I can help you if you want me to. And that is, every week, and in fact, I do this daily. I ask myself, what did I do well today? I write it down, then I write down, what could I improve? Because there's always something I can get better at. What did I learn today? Some of what I learn or reinforce is good. Some of what I learn or reinforce where I've been triggered and lost control. I have to admit that too. And lastly is, what am I going to do about it next week? So my suggestion is, if you did that and you turn that into the person responsible for your review and said, here's how I think I did this week. I'm available Monday to have a conversation. What would happen? I think what you'll find is sometimes things that you just let slide by and escalate into quarterly or annual conversations turn into confrontations because you didn't have enough conversations. So I think that's how you avoid quarterly confrontations. And remember, you can only control what you can control, and that's a good thing, because in the end of the day, it helps you from pointing out what other people are doing, and it helps you evaluate on what can I do. Because again, I just like to point out that things aren't always going to be fair, but what is fair is that you have control over how you play the hand that you're dealt. So, I got 15 seconds to keep it in my 15 minutes. Hope this has been useful for you. And again, I highly recommend you either read or get an audible version of these two books. Thanks again.